So, so at the theoretic level, premise, humans are culture creating creatures. Right? We create technologies. Some of these are psychotechnologies like meditation or math or language. Some of them are more physical technologies like the internet. These technologies, culture, changes us, and rinse, repeat, keep cycling. Okay, we have our particular culture that we've been operating under emerged in the context of a particular set of technologies that gave rise to certain capacities for things like coordination, value exchange, communication. Right? Just realize that, for example, the American political system, born in the 1770s, 1780s, was designed in a context where communication was by written letter, handwritten most of the time, occasionally printed pamphlets, and horse. And so it has a distance of diffusion, it has a speed of transmission as a fundamental implication for all the other characteristics of how it works. Like why does the the events from the election to inauguration, why do they take place where they take place? Because that entire structure was built around fucking horses. Right? That's how it worked. Right? And so it was congealed around that. By the way, one of the reasons why change happens is some things change faster than others, and the things that don't change ultimately have to change in order to respond to the new context. All right. So, fast forwarding, we're now operating with a mismatch where almost all of our institutions, from the very low level, even how families operate, all the way up to global, were designed, and in many cases, forced into by the cultural, technical fabric of the late 20th century. Did I just lose?
No, we're here, buddy. We're here.
Okay. And that's everything. Like the way we do schooling, the way we do finance, the way we do the economy, the way we obviously make political decisions. That's all like old tech, and there's a big change coming. Right? That big change is baked in because it was new stuff has happened. Like the methodology for communications that dominated the 80s, right? Fax machines and telephones, ain't how we do it anymore. And the institutional structures that were built around those communications technologies are deeply dysfunctional in the context of how we do it now. All right. So just that's the frame, right? That's the idea. The shifts that are occurring is almost like this huge pieces of reality have already moved into the 21st century. And now other pieces that have more viscosity to them, right? They're just gunkier and slower and crunchier, are now slowly being dragged, kicking and screaming over the threshold. And the velocity is now increasing because more and more moves into the future, the strength of the attractor of the future gets stronger, and therefore the change happens faster. It's almost like imagine a sun, and there's like a black hole that starts to orbit the sun. And so for a while, the relative masses, that the sun is much more massive than the black hole, so the gravitational field of the sun is attracting energy to it. But every time a little bit of mass moves to the black hole, the mass of the black hole gets higher, which increases its relative gravitational field, and the mass of the sun gets a little bit less, which decreases its relative gravitational field, and you get this transfer that has an exponential acceleration. At a certain point, it just flops. Okay. And there we are, all right? Welcome to now. So crypto is a good example. So when I personally got involved in crypto in something like spring of 2009, something like that, like not too long after, maybe 2010. Can't remember exactly, but not too long after the white paper came out and the first GitHub stuff were being done in Bitcoin, and I've been tracking it through every single wave and cycle since then. I was part of the MT Gox thing. I was part of the Silk Road 1, 2, and 3. I actually purchased drugs over the Silk Road.
Same.
By the way, very expensive in retrospect.
Totally. I did too. My first coins I got were $80. $80 for Silk Road. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. I think I ended up spending something like 20 Bitcoin.
Right. Same. Me too. Looking back on it, please. Spend $1 million on whatever that was.
Yeah, that was very expensive, but it's called learning. You learn. from the inside, like really know. So here we are.
Yeah.
So what's up? So back to the frame. One, the modes of communication, and now particularly modes of coordination, modes of how people can actually find ways to engage in collective action, to work together, to collaborate with each other, to do stuff, which involves things like how do we share value, are now becoming established. New ones, entirely new ones. And that's a big deal. If you know history at all, pretty much every time a new basic technology, a new cultural capacity for how people can coordinate action and share value, when something new like that comes up, it inevitably is a big shift. And this thing, blockchain, which by the way, just so we can frame, is probably about 1/10 or even 1/20th of the whole big shift that's happening, but it's very salient and very present. This thing, blockchain, is maturing and beginning to grab more and more by virtue of its capacity to support novel modes of collective coordination. Okay? So if you're sitting there in the liminal order, one of the questions I would pose is, how do you guys play in this space? And how do you leverage the virtues, the values of being in the liminal order, the sets of responsibilities and capacities that show up in the being part of this group, to outcompete others in this emergent space? Okay, well, there's a few very straightforward ones. One is, emergent spaces are intrinsically liminal. They're novel, constantly novel. How do you actually pay attention to what's happening so you can perceive emergent new possibilities in advance of others? How do you now coordinate with another group of people to get diverse perspectives, but with no noise or defection in between? Right? My hope is that in the liminal order, you would have two very strong advantages. One is the individuals, doing things like committing to the protocols that you've articulated, will in themselves not have a significant amount of bullshit in the way that they perceive and speak into the world. They are clear signal. They are good instruments of what they are, right? As opposed to projecting their trauma into the expressions that they bring, or failing to see reality because they're using bad frames, or just being a mess because they're taking drugs, for example. They're just clean signal. And we'll speak honestly and earnestly with integrity with each other, without things like an egoic desire to be the one who wins, or to grab the one ring and be the one who takes more, but actually recognizing, hey, this is a story where to participate honorably and fully in a collaboration where each and every individual is committed to honorable and full commitment, and their individual capacity to participate and their collaborative capacity to be on the same team. Right? I'm going to coin it, or give you a new term, assabiyah, in a second, is to be part of what's known as a winning team in liminal space. Right? So if we are able to play in this way, tradition tells us this is what winning team looks and feels like in a liminal space, when in battle, right? When novelty is emerging and the changes are happening so rapidly that the real skillfulness is the ability to see opportunities and then to capitalize on those opportunities rapidly and with limited error, right? Because I'm throwing my energy into novelty. If I have error, I might distract myself and just be off the bleeding edge for a while, or I may have wasted my resources on a bad path. So it's huge right now, big. The moment is heavy in possibility. The moment is high risk, high reward. When I'm exploring a space of high risk, high reward, what I need to have is a broad, solid platform of stability that can see different perspectives and rapidly identify the ones that are the most likely, and then probe those with limited loss. So I can send people on probes into a certain direction, and when they come back, they will tell with clarity and truth, here's what is being seen, so the group can actually flow its shared resources increasingly effectively into the pathways that are the most generative, right? The most productive, higher capacity. So Asabiyah, I don't know if we've talked about this, but it's a good one. During the Islamic Golden Age, a scholar, Ibn Khaldun, traveled from the south of Spain across North Africa, all the way to, let's say, I don't know, Cairo or Baghdad. And he noticed, as he dropped in, because that was a slow travel, like he would travel over months to do this, that every city had kind of the same story, which was this cycle where the city would be in some stage between ascendance and decadence. If it was an ascendance, the people who were in charge of the city were the sons of those who had come from the desert. Okay? The grandsons of those who come from the desert will have become more decadent. The great-grandsons will become truly decadent, and the people from the desert will come and conquer them, take over the city, and their sons will now sit in an ascendant city. Right? So these cycles, and we know this phrase, right? Hard times create strong men, right? That cycle. He noticed this as well. But he looked at it, he's like, why? Why is that happening? And the term he used was assabiyah, which is something like ability for a group of people to coordinate with smooth, high fidelity. A SEAL team. A SEAL team has a high assabiyah. Nobody's worried about somebody else fucking them over. Right? Everybody's able to be fully committed to the well-being of the whole team. In fact, not only is, must be. And everyone has learned their proper role. So you're getting maximum bang for the buck. And everybody is always willing to give up their particular location if somebody else on the team would be better at doing that, because the well-being of the whole is first and foremost. Right? That is high asabiyah. Think about the multiplier effect when you're operating in that fashion. Compare that to the decadent city. In the decadent city with low asabiyah, everybody's kind of looking to figure out how to take their piece. Everybody's holding back some portion of what they're really seeing. Everybody's trying to own and control things as opposed to give them up, because the well-being of the whole is no longer the priority. The well-being of me is the priority. And that creates a breakdown of coordination capacity. So if I've got a team that has, let's say, a in principle capacity of, let's say, 100, if they have high asabiyah, they're getting 100 out of 100. Perfect asabiyah is 100 out of 100. As the asabiyah goes down, maybe it's like 2 or 3 out of 100. Right? In a truly decaying environment, people are now betraying each other and lying to each other. And their own capacity is literally getting in the way of the capacity of the whole. It may actually be negative 50. You can have deeply negative, and they're consuming the seed, like just the value that is living in the environment that they're in, to support themselves, because they're no longer even vaguely generative, which means that even a small group, say you have a group that has a potential of 20, but they're operating at 18 out of 20. And they come to a city that has a potential of 1 million, but it's operating at -2. 18 is better than -2, and they can conquer them. And so to form asabiyah is the most virtuous virtue in the context of complexity, in the context of chaos. And even a relatively low potential has relatively high actuality when the asabiyah is high. And if you have protocols for how people can become part of what you're doing while maintaining that asabiyah, now you're indomitable. You cannot be defeated. This is Alexander the Great's core insight. He was able to not just defeat the Persians, but also to bring the power of the Persian Empire into what he was doing while maintaining a relatively high asabiyah, which meant that his sphere of power continued to expand. Okay, now, hey, crypto guys, take this lesson. They're just beginning to notice that this is no longer, all right, so let's see, somewhere in 2017, it's no longer a science fair project or a get-rich-quick scheme. It's no longer a scam or a science fair project. Somewhere in 2016, 2017, there was a learning that this is real. It may actually be the future. Many people thought this before, but there was like the basic mass of people who were participating were either kind of just playing or autistically just doing the thing that they couldn't help do, or were more or less playing it as a scam, some variation. I will make my money and I'll go back into USD. Then you had your hodlers, right? And the hodlers were like, almost in many cases just intuitively, like the GameStop guys, kind of like, okay, fuck this thing. I don't know what else happens, but that's true. So I'm just going to hold. Now we've moved into a space where people like Vitalik Buterin are earnestly and intentionally thinking about things like public goods. Shit. We actually have to start thinking about the fact that not too long from now, we are actually going to be holding responsibility for how almost all of the basic functions of how human beings do things in civilization are happening through us. Like, we at least have to start thinking about it for real, earnestly. How do we do stuff like governance? How do we do stuff like education? How do we actually begin to use these new technologies that have now begun this process of rapidly consuming the things that were closest to them? But as that consumption begins to accelerate, as the sphere of coordination has the capacity to maintain its quality of assabiyah, because it's built to be the sort of thing that can scale. People can attach themselves to the blockchain self-organizing collective intelligence, right, to use the term that I coined and maybe want to take back as it's a little bit of a mouthful. But they can attach to it and they can build their own project. And that project has a way to be synergistic with other projects. Okay, so let me talk about what seems to be showing up in the context of this particular metaculture. Notice some things. It's intrinsically global. This shit is happening everywhere. So there's nothing about your particular culture that is it. There's definitely not a purely sort of Israeli or American or Chinese. Well, Chinese are a little bit different. Their political system has captured a lot of it, but nonetheless, nothing about your particular culture or nation that is bigger than this thing. This thing allows those particular groups to find ways to leverage their advantages in different ways, but they're part of a bigger story. By the way, nothing about your particular typology. Right? If you're sort of, okay, I'm going to get teams to work together well, good, there's a role for you to play. No, I'm going to step back and not communicate with another human being at all and just writing code. Oh, good, there's a place for you to play too. So this really interesting, right? The space has a way for people to find their proper role without anybody being in charge of defining those roles or telling people where to go. Right? There is no HR department, and there is no middle management, which is, of course, one of its primary advantages, because HR departments and middle management become parasites very quickly. It's almost their nature. Okay, second, it is native to the internet. It doesn't even have a notion of using fax machines and telephones. It uses all the technologies that have been developed over the past 20 and 30 years intrinsically. Right? It lives on Discord. It lives on Twitter. It lives in the 4chan. Right? It lives there. It is so native to those environments, which means that its unconscious and intuitive ability to deploy and use those as part of its fabric of mediation and communication is masterful. This is one of the reasons why it just cannot help but just destroy, crush, consume the institutional structures that it's replacing. It's like, well, I can use examples from more if you'd like, but to have learned how to use things like radio to coordinate squad level tactics was to categorically outcompete everybody who was trying to use fucking telegrams and carrier pigeons. Just imagine that. if you figured out how to use tanks, airplanes, and radio, and automatic machine guns, and the other guy is still using World War I level coordination technology, who's going to win? Same thing here, obviously. But at the same time, it's highly immature. Liminal order opportunity, highly immature. It is very much in a liminal space. It is every season, there's a consciousness now in blockchain of these sort of winter, crypto spring. Every turn of the seasons, there is a new S-curve, a new exponential exploration of an entirely new possibility. Okay. So who wins in those kinds of spaces? The guy who has the higher assabiyah every time. Can't help but. Which shows up as an interesting, almost now unconscious or received wisdom. Like in DeFi, if you want to copy somebody else's DeFi infrastructure because they're generally complex as a smart contract, you can. If you do it honestly, like ask permission, say, hey, can I copy this? Almost always they'll say, sure, go ahead. And now you are kind of part of the broader team because you verified that you can play like a good player. which means you have the ability to have more access and resource. If you make one false move, if you're a dick, yeah, you can get that micro advantage, but guess what? Now you're a dick, which means you don't get access to the conversations. People aren't just they're not going to think of you as a person as part of their broader, extended, decentralized Asabiyah. So everybody who plays honestly and with integrity and shares clearly and effectively according to the increasingly discovered cultural wisdom of this expanding new kind of way of civilization is somehow part of the team. Now, of course, there are many different teams already because there are different cultural intuitions. And the earliest Bitcoin guys have a different sense of aesthetics and values of what is right behavior than, say, the fork that happened in ETH. Remember, ETH was a fork from Bitcoin. And then, of course, you've had many forks from there. And each one has a little different niche. It is very much an evolutionary metaphor. If you think about it like the way that if you've ever seen like a bacterial colony on a petri dish, and you watch it grow, and you'll see these lines come out, and then they'll spread like alluvial plain in a river. Hold that mental image. That's what's happening. Blockchain is right now engaging in an evolutionary exploration of the possibility space that is available underneath simultaneously the construction of strong novelty using new technologies and the disruption of weak legacy using new technologies. So whether you're eating the, right now, for example, banking, savings, it's pretty ripe, pretty close to being eaten, because the Fed has crushed interest rates. Savings is just you'd be in some sense stupid not to be using DeFi for your savings. You should just, if you currently have, $50,000 in a bank account and you're earning, 0% interest in your savings account, put it into DAI and then stake those DAI. And you'll be making 12%. It's not zero. And by the way, the risk on that is now rapidly approaching the same, if not stronger to be in DAI, frankly. And you can see, like right now, empirically, that the crash that's just happening right now, a lot of the infrastructure that got built in the previous winter, like DAI, for example, is proving quite resilient.